I'm here with Professor Michael Winkelman from Arizona State University. And Michael, welcome to Gnostic Media Research and Publishing's podcast number 22. And how are you today? I know you're down in Brazil. How is everything down there, and how's life down there?
Well, it's still a job, as it seems. I'm getting ready to do this Fulbright research on the health of the ayahuasca church members, and research is always a lot of work, and then you got to deal with the cultural differences in the language. But we're in a beautiful place. I'm staying at Huasca, which is a research center run by a friend of mine, Luis Eduardo Luna. So it's a beautiful place, and maybe some of your listeners will be here someday.
And with that. Up there in Oregon, and I had at one point tried to get you two in touch with each other, Dr. Martin Ball up there, and he's got a brand new book out, Entheogenic Evolution, where he's arguing for spiritual versus established religious freedom, and that's something else that needs to be looked at as well as a different approach, because shamanic cultures in general are not about going to some structured church. There may be some instances of that, but a lot of times people are much more individualistic in their practices, and to have a quote-unquote establishment of religion, to me, seems to be a violation of freedom of religion of the individual in the first place.
Right. Yeah, I think we've seen some interesting precedents in recent years where I believe both Peru and Brazil have declared ayahuasca part of cultural patrimony. And to me, it seems like we really ought to have a much broader claim about the use of the entheogens as part of humanity's patrimony of spiritual experiences. And I think that the evidence is clear that not only have these been part of human spiritual practices for at least tens of thousands of years, but there's a great likelihood that these substances may have actually played a significant role in the evolution of our uniquely human capabilities. So, in a sense, they're sort of part of our own indigenous psychology. We have sort of an innate religious capacity related to the effects of these exogenous substances upon the way our neurotransmitter systems operate, leading us into these experiences of connectedness with Gaia, with the earth, with the universe. And so maybe one of these days we'll see the mushrooms part of humanity's spiritual patrimony and respected everywhere as that.
Well, I find your statement interesting because in your recent book, Supernatural is Natural, a Biocultural Approach to Religion, you really prove, which we'll get into more later, but you really prove the evolutionary aspects of religion and through Darwinian theory. And you also talked about Gaia just a moment ago. What are your feelings about those two philosophies, Lovelock's and Darwin's, if you wouldn't mind talking about that for a minute?
Well, I think, Darwinian theory has a lot of different implications for understanding not only religion, but the relationship between the human species and these other plant species. And what it helps us understand in some very direct ways is how it is that human adaptations as a species have been shaped by these exogenous substances in the environment. One of the things that many people who look at evolutionary theory fail to give sufficient attention to is the recognition that one of the key influences in evolution is the influences from the environment. That's what we are adapting to. And there's, I think, clear evidence that humans and our chimpanzee cousins, if you'll accept that metaphor, differ significantly in our ability to utilize these substances. And to me, this speaks to ancient human adaptations to the selective benefits that were accrued by the ability to use the effects of these substances to more accurately perceive our connections with the planet. And one of the things you find in shamanic cultures around the world, as well as within the contemporary traditions that use these sacred plants, is the notion that these plants connect us with the environment in some special way. They enhance our sense of the animistic properties of nature. They give us a better understanding of how the universe functions and how our own planet and the species around us function. So in this sense, I sort of see a convergence of this notion of Gaia with these ancient notions about humans' evolution. That is to say, part of our evolution was becoming more aware of our relationships to the planet. And I think these plants were a key tool in enhancing these forms of awareness.
Very fascinating. And, well, since we're on the subject, what specifically is the study of religious evolution in the context of your work?
Well, actually, my work has looked at religious evolution in a couple of different senses. My earlier work, for instance, in a book I published called Shamans, Priests, and Witches, I was concerned with how do religious institutions evolve as societies evolve. And what I focused on in that book was the idea that we were, as hunter-gatherers, universally shamanistic cultures. But that as societies became agricultural, developed more complex political systems, new forms of religious organization emerged that we would call priesthoods and more directly tied to what we call religion. So one aspect of this has to do with just how do anatomically modern humans and their social institutions related to spirituality change as a function of the complexity of the society.
What type of societies worship the ancestors, and what type of societies worship a high god figure?
Well, what we find cross-culturally is that ancestor worship is linked to tribal-level societies where the structure of society and the structure of authority is based upon kinship relations, such as in a patrilineal system, a hierarchy based upon your kin and the eldest kin in the group. And in this sense, we see a religious system, ancestors rule us supernaturally, that directly reflects the actual social system. Your superiors in your kinship group are the people that rule you. So in this sense, we see kind of Durkheim's idea that beliefs about the supernatural mirror the realities of society. Research by some sociologists and more recently by some social psychologists also point out that societies that have a belief in a supreme God, a single hierarchical God over everything else, are societies that tend to have the same kind of political system, a hierarchy that basically is headed by the king or the emperor. So once again, we see a supernatural set of beliefs, one superior God over everybody, reflecting the society in which there's one ruler that's over everybody. So this sort of elaborates upon the earlier question you asked about the relationship between society and religion. What both of them tend to reflect is a power system that has the same principles. And both of them reflect a system in which there are moral rules. The rules of society, the rules of the gods basically merge in the common ancestor worship led by the leading member of the social group or the kinship group, or as was often the case in medieval Europe, where the king was viewed as a divine being and the head of the religious organization of the society. So in this sense, your question reflects basically the same kind of underlying dynamics in which societies and their implicit structures create the relationships that are then reflected or projected into the supernatural.